Hello.
Okay, everybody, let me just make sure everyone is here. So, yes.
Hello.
Word.
Just checking in. Giving everyone co-host privileges so you can.
Okay, let's see. Okay, Lisandra, we need to make George a panelist. I see him in the attendees list. All right. Okay, might give people a few minutes just to make sure we can get everyone, all the attendees that want to be here. So maybe give them like 1 minute or so before we get started. I want to apologize again for missing a portion of the introductory meeting, but we needed an extra moderator for this, and I had already committed to do this author event with some kids in Denver. So sorry again for being a little bit late. Okay. I think we can probably go ahead and get started. So again, I'll just kind of briefly introduce myself and say I'm Theanne Griffith, assistant professor at UC Davis, and I'm really excited to be moderating this breakout room. I want to keep it, nice and informal, and I have some questions that I will use to kind of kick off the session. But attendees, if you have specific questions that you would also like to ask, please put them in the Q&A, and I will, as quickly as I can, get to those, because those are the questions that we really want to make sure we have time to address, not just the questions that I thought would be interesting for you guys to hear about. So I'm really happy that we have such a diverse group of career paths here. We have industry from one end, from kind of like two different ends, from the startup end, as well as working in industry. And then we have academic professors, and then also a PI at NIH, which is similar to academia, but I'm actually very curious. That's one of my questions, is some of the differences of what it might be like between academic versus government, I guess you could say, running a research program. But for the first questions I want to start off with are for Denise and Blanton. And the question is this. So we hear a lot about, that academia is hard and it can be a toxic place. And I think we all know that and recognize that. And it can be especially challenging for people of color, especially Black people. So I kind of wanted to not talk about that right away and actually kind of flip the side and talk about what are some of the things that you love most and that are maybe feel kind of like the most feel like a privilege, because I feel that working in academia is somewhat of a privilege. And I think that's the reason, in my opinion, that they've excluded certain groups from working in academia, because there are some bonuses and some really high points that go with an academic career. If it was like all, fire and brimstone, then they would just let everyone do it because it wouldn't be that fun, right? But there's some good stuff back there. And so I'd love to hear what's some of your favorite things about working in academia, or what are some of the things that you really want to kind of highlight as being like the privileges of working in academia? Denise, you're more than welcome to go first if you'd like.
Thank you. That's a really nice question. I'm excited to answer. I just want to say that I have to leave in about 20 minutes, so I apologize to everyone that's here. But I would say that two things that come to mind right away are the fact that I get paid to think. Like, no one tells me what to do. It's kind of amazing, actually, to just be guided by my own imagination for what is possible or what questions are interesting, and just kind of just do that. So I don't have a boss that tells me what to do every day. I just kind of come up with my own what I want to do. And I also really enjoy the flexibility. I think that especially the pandemic has highlighted how nice it is to not be able to do what I want on my own time. There's always downsides to everything, right? Because now I'm working at midnight and there's no boundaries, which can almost be a bad thing. But I enjoy the flexibility and just the kind of intellectual freedom of the job. I think that's a huge privilege.
Awesome.
Yeah, so I completely agree with Denise. I think the academic freedom for sure is a big bonus, and you know, being able to, you know, read a paper and say, okay, you know, I want to actually kind of shift you know, directions a little bit and start to work on this kind of other aspect of a project that, you know, we've been involved on. It is really huge. You know, you have to convince, you know, the funding agencies to support it, but at least, you know, you have the opportunity to pursue it. I would definitely say the flexibility. You know, I really enjoy the lifestyle of being, you know, an academic scientist. And, you know, once you get tenure, you do have that, you know, it's nice to have that security. I'm not going to deny that at all. And then for me, actually, the big thing is training and working with such a, you know, diverse group of individuals, really from all around the world. I mean, it certainly makes the job more interesting, and you know, to see how, you know, the different minds can come together and sort of push a project along. Those are really the highlights for me.
Yeah, I have to say that I absolutely am just loving the mentoring aspect of my job. I don't know if more than I thought I would. I always enjoyed teaching, but it's just really a highlight of my day when I get to interact with the people in my lab and just kind of, you know, chat and see what they're doing and teaching them all of the new and fun stuff that we're doing. One thing I wanted to add too that I think is really fun about being in academia, and this is not necessarily specific to academia, but I've gotten to travel a lot for conferences, you know, like international conferences, and I didn't pay for it. And that was also really cool. And I'm sure that can come up in different ways. It's not just an academic thing per se, but that kind of also is a really, really fun, you know, my first Gordon conference was in Switzerland, like up in the mountains. So that was really awesome. And I think that's another kind of perk of the job, is that science is international, and thus scientific conferences are often international, and you just get to kind of explore the world and take your science along with it. So thanks for those answers. Now, Mario, so I'd love to know, you know, what is different about working in an NIH as a PI, or even maybe as a trainee, as opposed to a more traditional, I don't know, a traditional like university or college setting? I'm very curious myself.
Bureaucracy.
No, it gets worse.
No, seriously. It's actually, it has some important similarities and obviously some differences. We don't have, for example, here a graduate program, but the NIH does have a graduate partnership with a few academic institutions like Brown University, Johns Hopkins, as well as some international institutions like Karolinska, Oxford, Cambridge. So we do have the opportunity to recruit students into the laboratory, and you know, there's a lot of postbacs, postdocs. So that aspect of our research and our day-to-day does have an academic feel to it. There aren't courses or anything like that, but we're fortunate to have a very strong sense of community, scientific community, that from that part, it does feel very similar to academic research. Obviously, you know, I joke about the bureaucracy, but one of the limitations is that, you know, it could feel a bit different in the sense that there's this government sort of mindset that can permeate into the research, and you know, we've been very fortunate that being a scientist within the NIH has a lot of flexibilities in terms of like the research direction that you can take. And we've been fortunate to be surrounded by a bunch of individuals who were maximizing on these opportunities to be creative, to do different things. You know, if we're not writing a grant to support our research, we can take some risk, and that can be actually quite exciting. So I really enjoyed my time here. And as Blanton mentioned, I think one of the aspects of my time here that I've enjoyed is actually the mentoring. I think it's one of the perks of this job, which I think is similar at NIH, and also extramurally, the fact that we can partake into training of younger generations, inspire them to do science and continue in the path, and become as excited into it as we got to early on in our careers.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. So my next question is for Curtis, our startup founder. So I think that's just so cool. A classmate of mine from Northwestern is also a startup founder. And I think it's incredibly brave. It sounds terrifying for somebody like me, but there's a lot of opportunity, I would say, there, right? So when we think about academia, you always hear, at least, there's only so many positions open and all of these applicants. So there's just a select few slots. But with something like a startup, you can just start it up. You don't have to wait for someone to give you permission or create a job listing, right? So could you talk just a little bit more about some of the opportunities that are out there for startups? And again, I missed the introductory portion, so I hope that I'm not asking you to say something you've already said, but kind of also expand upon some of your motivations for starting your startup.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, I mean, I think the thing about entrepreneurship and startups is that ultimately, everything starts and ends with you. So you're not reliant on any large systems. You have to go out and find where's the money, who's interested in the same things you are. Where are the pitch competitions, where are the accelerators, and are they aligned with the type of things you want to do? I think probably the biggest thing I've learned so far, and I'm by no means an expert, I'm still I'm working on it, but is really to align your interests. You can't go to in some rare cases, you might be able to go to some very unbiologically related tech investor and get money. They call that dumb money, which is sort of not, sort of derogatory, but you got to find out who's interested in solving the same problems you are, or making money in the same area you want to, or whatever that is. Once you find people that are really aligned, that's when there's a real opportunity. And so just like a word of advice for anybody who does end up going and trying to do startups and stuff is don't waste your time with people that are not aligned. Like, you could spend your entire life going through a list of 200 different investors that maybe only 1% really will care about what you're doing. And so your job there is to really figure that out, and really to try and narrow in and get yourself the right audience. And yeah, so what was the second part?
Just kind of like some of the opportunities that are there, like kind of like, the holes in the market, like where, if someone's thinking about like what they're interested in, like what are the opportunities, like, and also if you could like expand a little bit upon how you learned all of this, like how you learned about pitch competitions and things of that nature.
Yeah, so there's there's some interesting resources. So for opportunity wise, there's startup companies are looking to hire people, and it's going to be this sort of interesting area where you're going to be part of a small team. You're going to be pretty focused on trying to achieve some goals. I mean, it depends on the size of the startup and what your goal is. Some startups are going to be like mega ones that are tied to, maybe Jennifer Doudna or something, and they're going to have a lot of money to play with. And so they'll scale really quickly, which is not necessarily the best approach, but so opportunity wise, you can find a lot of startup companies will be looking, and again, same thing with finding a job. And somebody mentioned in one of the in the introduction, if you have the skill set they're looking for, then they're going to want to hire you. And that's the position I'm in right now. I'm actually looking for somebody who has a very specific set of skills with T cells and flow cytometry and things like that. And I'm going after candidates like that. So to find those opportunities, yeah, you gotta. So I know more about the West Coast. Like there's what's called QB3, which is like a startup entrepreneurship sort of incubator between UCSF and UC Berkeley. They have websites, they have opportunities. They'll actually, if you're interested in starting a company, they have what's called, I think, Startup in a Box, and it's reasonably cheap. They will help you basically get you set up with a law firm, get you incorporated, all these things. But it ultimately, for the fundraising, comes down to you. To get yourself off the ground, one of the ways that I learned these things is there's a course called iCorps. So my postdoc was at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, which is actually it's technically owned by the Department of Energy, but it's run by UC Berkeley, managed by UC Berkeley. So they have what's called an iCorps course, and it's actually a bigger course. It's not just within there, like I think it's like a national thing, but it's they have their own dogma. It's a little, I don't know, what do you call it? In some ways, I find it a little culty, but it's a really good way to. They really teach you sort of a skill set of testing. Is it worth doing a startup? Like, is your idea or what you're going to work on actually translatable into something that someone's going to pay for, right? Ultimately, is it a drug? Is it a product? What is it? Who are you serving? So it really sort of equips you with how to find the target market, understand it, and ask the question, and actually go out and talk to these people and figure out, is what you're thinking going to actually be feasible, and are investors going to be interested, and those are sort of the big pieces. They're looking for return on their investment, you're looking for maybe to make an impact and maybe also to make money. So you really have to sort of align those pieces. So that's one good thing. And actually for there's a thing called Udacity, and they offer just like Google, like Udacity, Steve Blank, iCorp. I don't know if iCorps is tied to it, but you can get that course online for free without all the all the stuff, and it's actually super useful. So I would suggest doing that if you're interested. It'll help you pressure test your ideas and figure out whether this is something you want to do.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. That's super helpful. All right. And then we do have a question from the audience, but I just want to make sure I want to ask George one question before we get to that one. And so as our industry rep here, I was just curious, what do you love most about working in science industry? And also maybe what do you like least about working in science industry?
Yeah, interesting question. So I think industry in general, of course, can be fragmented into many different areas. And, the company I work for is a biotech company that builds technologies for drug discovery, which might be a little different from, say, big pharma that's focused in, say, drug discovery itself. So we facilitate the drug discovery process by providing the tools that they use in their labs to do screening and find drug candidates and so on and so forth. One interesting thing about what my company does is that we work with everybody. By everybody, I mean academic labs. We work with big pharma. We work with small companies, startups. Anyone who can use the tools we build can work with us. And we basically sell systems to them. And we work with CROs. So these are contract research organizations where companies contract these organizations and get them to perform experiments for them, simply put, because not every company. So think in terms of a startup. A startup might have an idea, but then running those experiments can be very resource straining in terms of lab personnel, in terms of all these many different things you might need, lab space, technologies, and so on and so forth. So for a company that needs the services, then the CRO steps in. All you need to do is throw money at them and they'll deliver the results. So it's, of course, that's simplistic, but the idea in general. So we work with all these different places. Now, one thing that I find very interesting and one thing I love about my job is that because of all these many different people we work with, the huge spectrum of labs that we are involved with, as an electrophysiologist, as an ion channel electrophysiologist, I have worked with, I think, every single ion channel that has ever been classified. Maybe a bit of an exaggeration there, but not so much. I have worked with a lot of things, and that's because of the opportunities afforded by the kind of work that I do. So there's never really a dull moment with what we do. It's obviously really fast paced. There's a lot of changing priorities and so on, which is one thing that would be a little bit different from what, say, you might be doing in your lab, where you get this, say you have a problem that you want to solve, and you crack at it and you can put a bunch of time into it, invest years of your time in solving this problem. For us, it's different. One moment I'm working on this, and the next I'm jumping on to the next thing. And through that process, I have been able to learn all these things. And besides that, I love working with people. So I'm able to interact with people everywhere. Like I said, I've been to almost every, whatever is called big pharma. I've been to almost every single one of those sites out there. I've been to government institutions, national labs. I've been to the NIH, so many different labs there, and so on. So, I'm afforded this opportunity to do all these different things and interact with all these different people, and also apply myself in terms of my different skill sets. So there's teaching in there, there's mentoring in there, there's research on the bench, there's business development, project management. So there is all these many different things that my job entails and I'm able to do, which makes it a really fun job. Not to mention the travel that you kind of touched on. I've been to very many places in the country, almost every single state. I've been to South America, I've been to Europe, all over the place, Canada, name it. Thanks to what I do. Now, what I might not like about it, let me see. Things like, say, travel may not be for everybody. I loved it to some degree, but it gets old, trust me. All these nice places, you go out there and at some point you feel like, okay, I think this is enough. So that's one of those things, and maybe I'm at that point where I've scaled back my travel schedule, but it's one of those things. All in all, though, I think it's pretty exciting, and it rolls almost every single one of the panelists' roles and tasks and responsibilities into this thing I do. I could identify with almost every single thing that everyone was talking about. So that's one thing I really love about this position.
Very cool, very cool. Thank you so much for that, George. So we do have a question in the Q&A that I know Denise had to run, but she did answer, and I saw that Mario also followed up with an answer. But I was wondering, Blanton, do you have any advice or a strategy to survive and thrive in academia? And an aspiring academic scientist is asking.
Yeah, so for me, I'm very goal oriented. And the nice thing about being in academics, and once you get on, like an NIH funding cycle, you become very goal oriented, because every 5 years, right, you're in this process, or every 4 years, you're in this process of trying to write the renewal or the next application. So I think a key for me is to set goals, and to also have, again, just for me, to have like a personal passion or ambition. Like there's something that, I really want to achieve. I'm, then I try and stay focused on achieving that, despite what the climate and the challenges might be that are around me, because there are many, and they don't just sort of go away. So I think staying focused on what it is you want your outcome to be, has been the key to my success.
Yeah, and I'll add on by kind of seconding some of the things that came up in the written responses. I think for me, as a Black woman especially, it's been so fundamental to have mentors and advocates on my side. And I just wanted to quickly distinguish between what a mentor and an advocate is. So a mentor is someone who's maybe more just kind of directly involved in either your research development, so like your PI, or perhaps even some of like more general career development advice. They kind of guide you. You can come to them with questions. They can give really good advice and kind of help guide your career. So I've been really fortunate to have awesome and amazing mentors at every step of the way, for the most part. And I also learned, because I had good mentors early on, I had maybe one experience with a not so great mentor, and I recognized it right away. And I was like, nope, don't want anything to do with that. Moving on to the next. And so I was really able to avoid getting into a lab situation where I knew I wasn't going to thrive or be supported. So understanding kind of how you want to be mentored to, and what values you are seeking in a mentor is important. But then I also want to say, try and find people who are going to advocate for you. And so that takes it, and I don't want to like set up this competition between mentors and advocates and that one is better than the other. They both serve very important purposes. But advocates are going to be people who are going to get on the phone for you, who are going to make phone calls, who are going to introduce you to people, who are going to nominate you for awards, who are basically really going to put you front and center in their scientific community, and really try and highlight you in a way that maybe a mentor is either unable to for whatever reason, or that's just not the relationship you have, or whatever. So I would suggest, definitely selecting the people that you receive advice from, and the people that you network with, very consciously, seeking out those people. And then also, I think setting goals is so important. It doesn't feel like it kind of along the way, like it feels like such a long thing, right? Like you're either a new graduate student or something along those lines, starting out maybe an undergraduate student, and you want to become a PI, and that's like 10 to 15 years away. And so it seems like, how do I set a goal for 10 to 15 years from now? But understand there are so many little steps to get there. And that's what you should really set your sights on. Like, what is the next step that I need to achieve? And how can I achieve that the best way possible? And if you just kind of go along those steps, things just start falling into place, kind of not randomly, they're intentionally. You did what you were supposed to do, you made your connections, but it almost feels like, oh, whoa, this is all coming together. When I got my job offer, I was like, oh, I did it. This happened. I don't know. How did I get here again? It just kind of all comes full circle. So keep your eye on the prize, the one that's like 10 or 15 years in front of you, but know that there are a lot of little steps to get there, and make sure that you like focus on, if you're a grad student, being the best grad student that you can be. If you're a tech still, being the best tech you can be, and learning as much as you can learn in whatever position you are. I think that's really helpful. And
I think that this point, just to add a little bit here, that this point that you just made is also relevant to think that for postdocs who are looking to transition into an independent academic position, it's really important to be aware of what you need to advance to an academic position early on during your postdoc, because then you can spend your time during the postdoc focusing on those aspects. You know, that way you don't have to reach the end of your postdoc and then have to react, essentially, right? I mean, so that's what I would recommend. It's important to be aware. So if you need to seek independent funding, if you need to like focus on your writing skills, not only your research output, presentation skills, you know, you're early on in your postdoc, you want to be aware of this, and you need your mentors to support you and help you in growing in those different aspects that are going to help you transition smoothly to an independent career.
Can I just add one thing, but that I thought about, Theanne, when you were speaking, and that is, you know, celebrating the small successes, right? And so, you know, that's really important, because I think it builds the self-confidence that you need to, in my opinion, to really sort of sustain the career. And so, you know, even if it's getting the fellowship application submitted, right? Celebrate it, right? Because that in itself is an accomplishment.
100% agree. Excellent point. Okay, so we have a couple questions about industry. So one is from Laura, who says, hello, I'm an international student looking to transition into industry after grad school. Not sure who to direct my question to, but I'm hoping someone can answer. Do you have any advice or tips for navigating the job search landscape as a foreign national? I'm sure George might have some insight onto this, perhaps.
Yes, and yeah, I think I can weigh in on this. And as you said, I think other people might have ideas on. There's really not that silver bullet that would be the solution for everything. But one thing that, from my experience, has been very critical. And speaking from personal experience, I was trying to fill a couple of positions a short while ago. And one thing that was really important for me was finding a person or people that had a particular skill set. So what I can say is this: industry, you know, spans this huge range of many different things. And as I described, you know, there's many forms of industry. Industry is this one word that really includes almost everything you can think of. And every single person that's a scientist can end up in industry, regardless of your interests, regardless of what you want to do, whether you want to work on the bench, whether you want to work away from the bench, whether you want to deal with human beings or not. There's something for everybody. And what I can say is we all have opportunities to really hone certain skills. So make sure you really know your area of research, because that's what people are looking for. Like I said, there's this huge range of possibilities out there. You want to be the candidate that is desirable. And that is not necessarily someone who's touched a little here, there, and everywhere. And I'm not suggesting by any means that you should pigeonhole yourself or anything. Learn everything you can learn. However, become really good at this specific area. In my case, that would be electrophysiology. And I say this because when I was screening for candidates, I had these piles of resumes, and people had many little different things. But as you know, anyone who's gone through this process knows, you usually want to pick out candidates quickly, and that is done based on something that sticks out. Are they coming through as experts in what you want? And obviously, in industry or wherever else, there's training involved, but you don't want, no one ever wants to really start a degree program wherever they are. No, what you want to do is get people who are near ready, and then you help them along whatever it is that you want to do. So what I would say is become very good at what you do. And we have opportunity every day. The research you do in your lab, find something that you can do really well. If it's a generation of mutant constructs, or whatever it is, be very good at that. Don't just touch a little bit of that, jump on to something else and the other. You could do that, but make sure that this one area is really well understood and you can be really good at it. And trust me, when you put down your resume, you'll find that this shines out and you'll have the focus, because once again, people are not looking, yes, everyone wants a well-rounded scientist, but at the same time, we want people who will hit the ground running. So be really good at what you are. If it's, molecular biology, be very good at that. And something else if you have the time, but that just one thing is good enough to find you a position that you might be interested in industry. If it's electrophysiology, like for myself, be very good at the fundamentals. Everything else will take care of itself.
Does Nanion hire international people? Because I know there's some complications, right, with like visas and things like that. So does Nanion hire international workers?
We have done that in the past. It's, the legal aspects of navigating immigration, especially in the recent years, has become challenging, and we would rather go in a direction that's not as taxing to get the people we want. But once again, if you're that one person who's distinguished yourself as very good at what you do, yes, absolutely, we would offer positions. So it's something that we have looked at. We have people from all over the world in our company. That is something that we have done, absolutely. Like I said, maybe in the recent past that's been more challenging, but absolutely, we've done it in the past.
The other thing I'll comment on that is you can also use the strategy of, I'm assuming this person, you're talking like, I have a PhD and I want a job, is to get a very targeted postdoc and use, it's pretty much like a postdoc's your ticket into the country, right? And you can do a lot of hustling, a lot of meeting people, a lot of building your network, and sort of, you're shaping your image and communicating how good you are at something. And the network you build and the people can be huge. So if there's a particular area you want to work in, if you want to be in the Bay Area or you want to be on the East Coast, like, maybe find a postdoc where you can help that lab because you have that skill set, but also, intend to build sort of a local network there. And I guarantee you, once, you're there, I would bet that will probably increase your chances of getting, and you'll probably actually refine exactly what you want by doing that process. At least in non-COVID times, there's tons of networking events. There's tons of like big, there's a JP Morgan conference in San Francisco. It's just like littered with, people from these companies. So yeah, so don't underestimate, you can use the academic system, hopefully contribute something, but also be sort of focused on doing that job thing. And an extra year, honestly, like as you get older, like years just become, kind of like months. So yeah, so that's just another strategy. I'll just put that out there for you.
Yeah, Sorry, actually, that was on my list of things to mention, and it's very important, like you say. And a lot of people don't know when you say networking, they wonder, how do I start? Where do I start? And I think a forum like this is a very good starting point. I think all of us here are here because we would wish to help in one way or another. And we know people in our different areas, and there are pointers we can offer to get people connected. But absolutely, networking is one of those huge things that is is important in any area of science, or whether industry, academia, or whatever it is that might be.
Yeah, I was actually going to also suggest maybe perhaps finding a postdoc here in the US, and ideally with the understanding that maybe it'd be a 1 or 2 year postdoc with the PI, and those positions are definitely posted. You know, I've seen 2-year postdoctoral positions posted. So that could definitely be a great strategy, and trying to land a postdoc in an area like the Bay Area or Boston, any of these places that have a lot of industry built into their local ecosystem could definitely be very helpful.
And maybe to quickly add to that, there are always industry postdocs as well. So we have a lot of those out there. If you look, you will find, and they're normally not very stringent in terms of their requirements, say, as far as immigration status is concerned. So as a postdoc or student, you can jump very easily and transition into industry postdocs that can get you most of the time absorbed within those organizations, or offer you a stepping stone to similar type positions in industry.
Excellent, excellent question. I also realized I missed a follow-up question from Nick. And since he asked also, can the academic scientists speak to the job market for academic positions? And I'm going to include Mario. I know he's technically a government scientist, but I think we can include him in this one here. Often we hear that the positions are scarce and difficult to find, creating the idea that you need to be ultra competitive to even consider pursuing an academic research career. I just want to quickly say, that is 100% true in terms of that feeling that in order to get an academic position, you have to be like hyper competitive. And that was actually something that really made me unsure of whether or not academia was going to be a fit for me, because I don't consider myself a ultra competitive person. I like to do things well, and I like to do what I like to do, but I'm not necessarily worried about, you know, the people around me. I just like to be my best self, right? And so I wasn't sure if that type of personality would get me a position or not. And what I think that I've learned after very recently coming off the job market is that, yes, you need to have like a good CV and all of that. Like you need to have certain boxes checked. But it also really, really matters who you know. And it all, you know, I was told about the position that I'm in by colleagues at a meeting. They said, hey, Theanne, there's a job opening in my department. You should apply to it. I think that you'd be a great candidate, you know? And it really helps to kind of know people and know people in different departments across the country. Sorry, Mario, go ahead.
Not to interrupt, I just wanted to add to what you're just saying, because I think that's a critical point. And, you know, related to this idea that you need to know people and people that are going to be advocate, it's really important to keep in mind that the way you get to that stage with certain people is by putting, you know, doing a good job. You know, like I remember a good a mentor of mine, my postdoc mentor actually, told me this one thing that I've actually like kept since I started my lab independently, and I tell every one of my trainees is treat every talk as a job talk. And whenever you give a talk, a presentation amongst colleagues within your departments, you know, make sure to give it your best effort, because you're going to have people in the audience, some of your peers, some, you know, PS from other labs, and then opportunities are going to come, and then they're going to keep you in mind. They're going to be like, oh, this person is taking this seriously. And that's what you need to keep in mind. I think that goes a long way.
Excellent, excellent point. I could not agree more. It is so, so important, because as you meet people, exactly, it's so true. They see you, and if they see what they like, they're going to remember that. and they're going to want to invite you to give a talk at the next conference if they saw you give a good talk. As someone who is getting ready to organize a conference in a couple of years, I want to make sure that I invite like really good speakers, right? And so if I've seen people give a talk and I know that they're going to be a good speaker, I'm going to have put those at the top of my list, right? And the same thing goes for every step of the career, of your career path. I actually, in my lab meetings, we started doing lab meetings, and I told my group that I'm going to treat these like internal seminars, not necessarily external seminars, but treat them formally. Give a polished presentation at every lab meeting, just so you can practice, so that when you do go out there, you've already kind of gone through this before. It's not necessarily the first time. You know, it's so very true. I'd like to say, what is the saying? You know, sometimes we can feel lucky that we got a position, or there's kind of a certain luck involved into it. And that's somewhat true, but luck is really just a combination of preparedness and an opportunity. If you are prepared all the time, then when that opportunity comes, it's going to feel lucky, but really it's because you did your homework and you were ready for it. And that is something that I'm so glad you brought that up, Mario, because it's just it's so true. And it kind of goes back to what I said about the stepping stones, just being really good at whatever your career path is. So if you're a grad student, you know, learning how to do and design good experiments, learning how to think really creatively about your project, and then learning how to present that data and that information to a broader audience in an exciting and accessible manner is going to take you a long way. And then also just being a good person, you know, being a friendly person. People like to work with other good people, you know, and so like just being a good person also does go a long way as well. Okay, so then our last question that we have in the box is again back to industry. And the question is, in industry, do customers request a specific technology first, or do you find different projects to work on and then find companies to sell it to? And basically, I think the question is kind of like, how much freedom do you have in choosing what you're working on, or the product that you're trying to sell, or things like that? I don't know if Curtis or George wants to start.
Go ahead, George.
Curtis.
Go ahead, George.
Yeah, so that's a sort of heavily loaded question. I think we can talk about it all afternoon and still have more that we've not covered. Yeah, I think this depends really on the type of industry you're looking at, depends on what the projects might be and so on. But to put it simply, every organization has its priorities. So let me bring it back to what I'm most familiar with, and then I'll explore other things in a moment and very quickly too. But the thing is, we as a company develop technologies that are used for drug discovery. So we have these projects that are of interest to us, and so along those lines, we will develop the tools that we need for that, or whether it's cell lines that we need and all that, we bring those in-house, and everything down from that, downstream of our processes at that point will be relating to that project. So if it's maybe developing a new application for our technologies or one of our platforms, what we'll do is get the cells, try that application and see, well, does it work? Can I solve this problem? So for example, yeah, you're working with cells. Can I record in a certain way? Is it possible to interrogate an ion channel that has never been worked on before? So we bring that and work on it. And the beauty about industry, of course, is that the resources will be there. You'll not have to worry about, hey, where do I get the money to run these projects? And of course, this is not a blanket thing by any means, because Curtis will argue and say, hey, I need to find that money. But the T-cell expert that you're looking for would not have to worry about that. You provide them with their resources, and they run experiments based on that. And the same, I think, applies to a drug discovery company. They have these molecules that they are working on, and then the question is, what would be the next step? So I think the questions that they are trying to answer are the ones that will direct where the research goes. I hope there's some light of shade in that, but Curtis can chime in and give his perspective on this.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Really, I think there's so many factors, like depending on the size of your organization, like if you go into like Genentech, it's kind of like a industry style, university style hybrid thing, but they do ultimately have objectives, but they also have PIs sort of built within, and they have projects and stuff. So that's like a big organization. You can probably, have a much more freedom somewhere like that versus like a small startup like mine. We're going to be very focused on a very specific sort of set of goals, and then hopefully as we grow and scale, then you can start sort of taking on more. But I think industry, you can work on anything you want to. You just got to find the organization who's working on it, really. I mean, generally there's not maybe like a ton of just, it's not really exploratory, just open question, we want to know this because we want to know this, but you ultimately often have to discover things in order to develop something. Like you're never going to not be, breaking new territory in whatever you're working on, even in industry. You might not get to publish about it and, speak at all these conferences about it, but you are going to be communicating with other scientists within the organization. You're going to be working on it, and, you can find, I think, probably a satisfying position doing probably whatever you're interested in, making more money in industry if that's something that matters to you early, at least.
Yeah, and I think in terms of research directions, in organizations like what you described, say Genentech as an example, or any of the big pharma companies, ultimately, the goal of doing all these things is profit. If you think from a business perspective, that's why they're in business. Of course, there's the other goal of helping patients and all the nice things you can say, but programs are cut all the time because either there are no prospects of success, or it's a long road, and so on. And you find that projects are even moved from one company to another, and you'd find a company selling their assets to another. By that, I mean their data, their drug candidates, and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, I think regardless of who you are, regardless of your research interests, there is a fit for you in industry. You will find a place that aligns with your interests, with your ethos, and really everything that you might want to do. And, I think like Curtis mentioned, you cannot run wild with your idea because it all has to fit within this framework of their overall goals. But there's a good degree of it if you're a PI in one of those larger companies that will provide resources and then let you try and tackle a problem from whichever angle your creative mind can lead you to.
Awesome. I feel like that's such a wonderful note to end our session on, because we have approached the hour. I believe this is the time that we're done. So I just want to thank the rest of our panelists for taking the time to talk about our different career paths. This has been really informative for me as well. So, and thank you for all of the attendees for joining us today, and have a great rest of your week. Go Black in Biophysics.
Yes, I just want to mention, please, we have tomorrow our Share Science event, and it would be amazing if you join us to share, what are you doing right now? Thank you so much.
All right, guys. Thank you again. Have a good one.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Nice to meet you.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.